was a caravan trader. He spent years having discussions with various people he met, and he had a tendency to believe what people told him. Even much later, long after he started preaching Islam, he was known as the ear. It's in the Quran, Surah 9, verse 61. And among them are those who torment the Prophet and say he is an ear. What did they mean when they called him an ear? Ibn Ishaq gives the historical background. I have heard that it was of him, a man named Nabtal, that the apostle said, "Whoever wants to see Satan, let him take a look at Nabtal ibn al-Harith. He was a sturdy black man with long flowing hair, inflamed eyes, and dark ruddy cheeks." Pretty racist to say this black man looked like Satan. He used to come and talk to the apostle and listen to him and then carry what he had said to the hypocrites. It was he who said, "Muhammad is all ears. If anyone tells him anything, he believes it."
David Wood, same David Wood, tried to kill his father with a hammer and was put into a mental hospital by his mother and was cursed with 2 disabled kids. So this attention seeker ex-con David Wood and the disbelievers of Makkah. So this is going to be part 1 of 3 refutations to that video, because David Wood cites a lot of stupidity in that video. Either he commits, he commits a lot of fallacies, but I'm gonna divide his video into 3 or 4 refutations. So this is just part 1. Hopefully tomorrow and day after tomorrow I can come up with the other parts of the refutation. But anyways, now this is what David Wood does. He commits fallacies, but he doesn't realize he's committing those fallacies, and he doesn't realize that those arguments against the Quran can be thrown back against the New Testament more forcibly. But we know David Wood's an atheist when it comes to Islam, when it comes to his analysis of Islam. But anyways, the disbelievers of Makkah, David Wood and the disbelievers of Makkah commit the genetic fallacy, the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. These are fallacies that say the thing before caused the thing after, or attacking the source of the claim instead of the claim itself. So there are true stories in the apocryphal sources, as even Christian scholars admit. This whole argument is a fallacy that backfires on the Bible, especially the New Testament, since the New Testament does the same thing. The New Testament copies or plagiarizes off Old Testament apocryphal sources. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of the New Testament plagiarizing or copying off Old Testament apocryphal books, and the Bible does it, and the Old Testament does it too. It plagiarizes off other sources. But let's look at 3 examples to save time. Let's just look at 3 examples of the New Testament plagiarizing Old Testament apocryphal sources. And Paul himself in Acts of the Apostles, etc., copies of Greek poets and pagan poets, etc. So if you read Acts of the Apostles, Paul is quoting pagan poets and Greek philosophers and Greek Greek stories, etc. So does that mean that Paul is plagiarizing whatever he read and whatever he heard? So this argument completely backfires on the Bible more forcibly. So let's look at 3 examples to save time. For example, Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3 plagiarizes all wisdom of Solomon, chapter 7 verse 25. Again, wisdom of Solomon's not in the canonical Old Testament that we have today. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 4 plagiarizes off 1 Enoch chapter 11 verse 1. Again, 1 Enoch is not in the Old Testament we have today. Revelation chapter 13 verse 17 copies off of or plagiarizes off 1 Maccabees chapter 13 verse 49. Again, 1 Maccabees is not in the canonical Old Testament that we have today, minus the Catholic version. So anyways, these are New Testament sources that are plagiarizing or copying off Old Testament or Old Testament apocryphal works. So David Wood's argument backfires, because we can say the same thing about the authors of the New Testament. They're copying off Old Testament apocryphal sources, so his argument backfires against the New Testament more forcibly. So these are just some of the many examples, like I said, of the New Testament plagiarizing or copying off Old Testament apocryphal sources. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 2 Corinthians, Revelation, 2 Peter, the book of Jude, James, etc., where the authors of these New Testament books or letters were copying off Old Testament apocryphal sources or plagiarizing off them. The defense Christian apologists give here is that there are true stories and sayings in these sources, and the authors of the New Testament are copying or quoting true stories and sayings. So this argument or this defense can also work for the Quran. So the New Testament and the Quran can be repeating true stories from these sources that came before them, according to Christian scholars like Raymond Brown and Don Stewart, etc. So these Christian scholars like Raymond Brown and Don Stewart say that there are true stories found in these Old Testament apocryphal sources, and that the New Testament authors like 2 Peter, the author of 2 Peter, the author of Jude, etc., are quoting or copying true stories and sayings found in those apocryphal sources. So the same defense can be given for the Quran if we are to be consistent. As for the Ibn Ishaq story about Nader bin Hattal looking like a black man, and this possibly infers some racism against black people, etc. Well, notice the source David Wood quotes. He quotes Ibn Ishaq. As for the Ibn Ishaq story, David Wood quotes, that story is not reliable or authentic. I already said that Ibn Ishaq is not a reliable source of information about the Prophet Muhammad. So Al-Dahabi listed major scholars of Islam who refuted Ibn Ishaq's reliability in hadith narrations. So I have to give credit to Jalal Abu Rub for providing these references. Imam Malik, for instance, said Ibn Ishaq is a liar. Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari, as well as Al-Ashmash, refuted one of Ibn Ishaq's narrations by saying Ibn Ishaq lied. As a general statement, Yahya bin Sa'id graded Ibn Ishaq as being weak in hadith narrations. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal discounted the reliability of Ibn Ishaq if he alone narrates a hadith. Also, Imam Yahya bin Matin, in another narration from him, Al-Nisa and Al-Darqani, stated that Ibn Ishaq was weak in hadith. The great Imam of Sunnah, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, also added that Ibn Ishaq's narrations are not accepted if they are about the Sunnah or the Sunan. That means the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad or stories of the Prophet Muhammad. So this narration is not authentic because it comes from a weak or unreliable source, Ibn Ishaq. So the source David Wood quotes is Ibn Ishaq, and like I said hundreds of times on my channel, Ibn Ishaq is not reliable according to classical and early Muslim scholars. And again, credit goes to Jalal Abdul Rab for providing these quotes from early and classical Muslim scholars. So that's not all. Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, who is a classic Salafi Muslim scholar, said that Ibn Ishaq did not provide sources for his stories or sayings, thus his stories cannot be used as authentic evidence. And Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, Mujal al-Fatwa, volume 13, page 345. So Ibn Taymiyyah, who is a big hotshot Salafi scholar, classical scholar of Islam, said that Ibn Ishaq did not provide sources or for his stories or sayings, thus his stories cannot be used as authentic evidence, against Islam. So again, this is Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah's quote right here, Mujal al-Fatwa, volume 13, page 345. So the reference is right there. Okay, so this is just the first part. Stay tuned for part 2 and 3. So there's many other things I want to refute in this stupid video, but this is just the first part. Stay tuned for part 2 and 3 of this refutation.